On my 68th birthday, I was pushed down and humiliated by my own son in front of everyone. "This spot belongs to my father-in-law, get out." But just a few hours later, an unexpected call reversed everything, changing his fate forever. The door to house number 24, Maple Creek Street, Boston suburbs, swung open. As I stepped inside, an unfamiliar voice cut through the blaring pop music and echoing laughter, speaking right in front of me. "Excuse me, who are you?" My whole body froze. The scent of butter and vanilla from the birthday cake in my hand still wafted, but my heart had turned cold. I clutched the cake box, took a deep breath, and replied slowly, word by word, "I am William Carter, Andrew's father." The atmosphere in the room briefly quieted, like a receding wave. Yet no one came closer. No one's gaze lingered on me for more than a few seconds. They just glanced over, a casual nod, then returned to their unfinished conversations. A bitter irony. Today was my birthday, a day when I should have been honored. Yet I had to introduce myself, to remind people that I was the homeowner's father. I am 68 years old this year. At this age, many of my friends have retired, relaxing with their children and grandchildren, enjoying the simple pleasures they had dreamed of their entire lives. As for me, I still sit in the CEO chair, managing the corporation I built from scratch. Outsiders often call me a business legend, an unshakable William Carter. But I know well, behind all the glory were long nights of sleeplessness, times when I gambled my entire fortune to keep the company afloat through countless crises. And the greatest price was the estrangement from my family, from my dearest loved ones. My wife passed away early. My private home near the company was just me, and the wall clock ticking away every second, every minute of the night. Andrew, my eldest son, seemed to drift further and further away from me after marrying Teresa. I had once thought that building him a complete home, taking care of all expenses from the smallest things like electricity and gas bills to mortgage loans, would make him remember his father. But day by day, I felt more like an outsider in his life, a money-providing machine rather than a father. Yet this afternoon, I still received a short text message from him. "Come over tonight, Dad." Just 6 words, no mention of my birthday, no congratulations. I read the message over and over a few times, then looked at the wall calendar. The correct date. A faint glimmer of hope sparked within me. Perhaps Andrew wanted to create a surprise, to wait until I was present to announce it. I clung to that thought, though deep down I knew it was just a way to comfort a heart that had been lonely for too long. I prepared carefully, as if for an important meeting. I wore a neatly ironed light blue shirt and a gray cashmere sweater. I chose an old bottle of wine, a Cabernet Sauvignon I had saved for many years, only for truly special family occasions. I stopped by my usual bakery and ordered a simple cake with "Happy Birthday, Dad" written in white cream, with small candles already inserted. Everything I did was for a single purpose, to arrive at this party as an expected, awaited father, not as a casual passerby. But now, standing in the brightly lit doorway, laughter and chatter pouring out like waves, I felt like a forgotten statue. No one mentioned me, no one stood up to greet me, no one offered me a seat. I could clearly hear the pop music drowning out my own breathing. I spoke up, trying to draw a little attention, a little recognition from the crowd. "Dad's here." My voice was swallowed by the clinking of glasses and the sound of laughter. A woman carrying a tray of food walked past, smiling vaguely, her eyes skimming over me as if seeing a random waiter who had wandered in. Then Teresa, my daughter-in-law, briefly passed by, carrying a basket full of bread. She merely glanced at me, uttering a dry remark. "Dad, find a seat, please." Then she disappeared behind the kitchen door, not even turning back to see my nod. I nodded, but I knew she hadn't seen it. I looked at the brightly lit room, the long table covered with a pristine white tablecloth, red wine shimmering in glasses, chairs packed. At the head of the table, a high-backed chair was placed ceremoniously, with a neatly folded napkin. Last year I sat there, raising a toast, listening to Ken, my grandson, miscount the candles, making the whole family laugh. I took another step into the light, hoping Andrew would see me, recognize me. He stood in the middle of the room, impeccably dressed in a white shirt, glass of wine in hand, laughing and chatting animatedly with Antonio, his father-in-law. I gently raised the cake box, intending to call his name louder, But Andrew just glanced at me, uttering a faint, "Yes." Then he turned away, continuing to clink glasses with the person next to him, as if I were just a fleeting shadow. I placed the precious bottle of wine on the wooden cabinet next to the hallway, gently opened the cake box, checking the happy birthday in cream. The lettering was slightly off-center, but still clear. I lightly stroked the edge of the paper, trying to keep my hand from trembling, from betraying the storm raging within me. No one noticed I had arrived. No one asked why I was standing here for so long. The room was crowded, but I felt like a superfluous shadow. I went into the kitchen myself and poured a glass of water from the filter. As I set the glass down, I saw Ken looking at me from the end of the dining table. His childlike eyes sparkled, a clear, loving gaze. He subtly waved. I smiled, a forced but the most genuine smile I could muster at that moment. But Teresa had placed her hand on her son's shoulder, whispering something. Ken obediently sat back down, his eyes still fixed on me. It seemed the atmosphere in this house was stranger than what I had imagined before arriving, and I stood still waiting. I waited to see, on my own birthday night, what my son would do. Did he really want me here? Or were his intentions more cruel than I thought? My eyes settled on the head chair at the table, where I had sat for years on every special occasion. The luxurious, leather-upholstered, high-backed chair placed most prominently a symbol of power and respect. That position wasn't just a chair, it was recognition, a sign that in this house I still mattered, still was the pillar of the family. Today, I was sure it still belonged to me. It was where I could breathe a sigh of relief, at least temporarily. I took slow steps, trying to maintain an air of confidence, placed the cake box at the edge of the table, preparing to sit down. I even intended to speak to Andrew, to ask if there was anything special he wanted to announce at today's party. But Andrew quickly stepped forward, his hand gripping the back of the chair, his eyes only glancing at me before focusing on some distant point. His voice was cold and hard as steel, loud enough to drown out the music blaring in my ears. "Dad, this spot isn't for you anymore." I was stunned. The whole world seemed to pause for a beat. "Not for me? Then who is it for?" My voice sounded dry, out of place amidst the thumping music. Andrew didn't answer directly. He just glanced at Antonio, his father-in-law, then turned away, continuing to talk with guests. Immediately, Antonio casually approached. He offered a half-smile, triumphant, took off his elegant jacket, and neatly placed it on the back of the chair. Then he set his glass of red wine on the table as if it had always been his spot, like a king settling onto his throne. The action was clearer than any words. The seat of honor now belonged to him, and I was non-existent. I stood frozen. All faint hopes of a surprise, a greeting, vanished completely. I looked at Andrew, trying to find an explanation in his eyes, an apology, a shred of lingering affection. But he completely avoided my gaze, burying himself in the noisy party atmosphere, as if I had never spoken. That disregard was more painful than any harsh words. He had done this intentionally. Teresa rushed out of the kitchen, pulling a flimsy, dirty plastic chair from a corner. The chair was faded blue, its legs wobbly, covered in scratches. She placed it next to a small table piled with unpaid bills, messy papers, so much so that I recognized a few marked overdue, bills that I myself had paid for them. "Dad, sit here for now. It's convenient," Teresa said, her voice dry, devoid of any expression. I looked at the dilapidated chair, then at the table covered with a pristine white tablecloth, the crystal chandelier casting a brilliant light, sparkling on the wine glasses and luxurious food. The distance between me and the main table was like an invisible but clear boundary. On one side was a world cherished and respected. On the other was where things no longer used were discarded, a forgotten corner. I sat down, my back aching from the flimsy plastic chair, and a feeling of humiliation rose to my throat. What the hell was going on in this house? On the main table, red wine shimmered in crystal glasses. I reached out to pour myself a little wine from the Cabernet Sauvignon bottle I had brought, the wine I had saved for years for special family occasions. But Andrew was quicker. He took the bottle, turned, and pushed it straight towards Antonio, laughing and speaking loudly enough for everyone around to hear. "Good wine should be enjoyed by those who appreciate it, right? Father-in-law?" Antonio nodded, smiling contentedly, raising his glass to clink with Andrew, not even bothering to glance at me once. Immediately after, Teresa hastily placed a glass of plain water next to me. Cold, bland, not a single offer of food, not a shred of concern. The guests' boisterous laughter, the clinking of forks and knives, blended into a mocking symphony of my awkward, pathetic presence. I felt as if I were attending a play in which I was the victim, surrounded by people to be ridiculed. I bowed my head, my hands trembling on my lap, trying to keep my breathing steady, trying to take deep breaths to suppress the surge of anger boiling within me. My heart felt heavy as lead, but I couldn't allow myself to collapse. I had come here and I would stay. Then, amidst the commotion, a small hand subtly placed a paper card in mine. Ken, my grandson, looked up, his eyes sparkling like two crystals, a pure gaze unburdened by adult calculations. "Happy birthday, Grandpa," the boy whispered, his voice tiny but as clear as a bell in my ears. The scrawled words written in crayon, the paper's edge crumpled from being clutched in Ken's small hand. But to me, it was a priceless gift, the only meaningful thing on this evening full of humiliation. I squeezed the card tightly, forcing a smile for the boy. Tears welled up, hot behind my eyelids, but I held them back. I knew, in that moment, Ken was all I had left in this house, the small flame keeping me from freezing completely. "Thank you, my grandson. I would stay. I needed to know what Andrew was planning, and I would not allow him to turn me into a complete joke." I sat on the flimsy plastic chair, Ken's card still clutched in my hand. Suddenly, the pop music faded. The noisy room began to quiet down. All eyes turned to Andrew. He stood up, wireless microphone in hand, and stepped into the center of the room where the chandelier light shone directly on him, making him the focus of all attention. I was surprised. Perhaps this is the moment. A faint glimmer of hope sparked within me again. Perhaps, after all this coldness, this was when he would wish me a happy birthday, a belated surprise, a silent apology for what had transpired. I exhaled, a sense of relief almost indescribable, only to have it vanish instantly. The drama began. Andrew started, his voice clear and confident, echoing through the room. "Today is a special day, not just because it's my father's birthday." Everyone applauded, the applause bustling with shouts of, "Congratulations!" I subtly bowed my head, a brief and surprisingly naive sense of emotion swelling within me. I had thought everything would end well, despite the initial difficulties. But Andrew continued, his voice hardening, sharp as a knife, plunging straight into my heart. "But because from today, the company will officially be taken over by me. It's time for my father to rest." The table erupted in applause, cheers resounding. Antonio, sitting in the head chair, offered a triumphant smile, raising his glass to congratulate Andrew. I froze, not from shock, but from the brutal truth laid bare. I was still the CEO, still held all executive power, still directly held the fate of the corporation, yet I was announced to be overthrown by my own son on my birthday, in front of so many people, so many large and small shareholders of the company present here. I tried to regain my composure, my voice trembling but firm, trying to overcome the surrounding noise. "What the hell are you doing? This company is still run by me. No handover has ever been approved," I declared, my eyes fixed on Andrew, trying to convey my resolve. Andrew just sneered, his eyes full of contempt and arrogance. He looked at me as if I were an outdated, obsolete person. "Everything has been arranged. The upcoming board meeting is just a formality," he said, his tone seemingly designed to extinguish any hope of my resistance. I looked around the room, hoping for a sympathetic glance. A bit of support, even a small nod would suffice. But I only met the averted eyes of guests, the murmurs of conversation gradually dying down and falling silent when they saw me looking. A heavy silence enveloped me, chilling me to the bone. I felt completely isolated. Andrew continued to ramble, talking about his new plans, his new visions, about how he would modernize the company. Every word he spoke was like a hammer blow to my legacy, to my pride. I listened, holding my breath, trying not to let my anger erupt. My hands clenched, my nails almost digging into my flesh. My whole body was taut as a bowstring, ready to explode at any moment. I looked at Andrew, at the arrogance and disrespect emanating from him. Little Ken, by now aware of the tense atmosphere, though not fully understanding what was happening, gently pulled my sleeve. His childlike eyes looked at me, sparkling with worry and a touch of fear. He said nothing, simply tugged my hand, as if to reassure me, or to make me leave this place. His action was like a lightning bolt tearing through the night of my indignation. I looked at the lonely candle on the cake I had brought, the birthday cake no one had paid attention to. One last small wish, a simple act, and even that was stolen from me. I wanted to blow out the candles, to make a wish for myself, for what little remained. But Andrew waved his hand, impatiently interrupting me. "Wait, don't interrupt. Dad's birthday isn't important anymore." All my patience shattered. Ken's card in my pocket was crumpled tightly. A cold current ran down my spine, but this time it wasn't fear, but absolute determination. My blood boiled. I sprang to my feet, the flimsy plastic chair rattling, a small sound that echoed loudly in the sudden silence of the room. "Not important? Then why did you call me here?" I declared, my voice ringing out with firm resolve, without a trace of trembling cutting off Andrew's words. I could not tolerate it anymore. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to me. But I didn't expect that very moment of standing up would usher in the most bitter humiliation of my life. Andrew spun around to face me, his eyes as cold as ice, but I detected a fleeting glint of surprise. Perhaps he hadn't expected such a strong reaction from me. Antonio set his wine glass down, his sharp eyes narrowing, scrutinizing me, then shifting back to Andrew with a small nod, an unspoken encouragement for his son-in-law. The guests stared, no one daring to utter a sound. I walked straight towards Andrew, keeping a distance of just a few steps. "Andrew," I said, my voice as steady as a rock, "did you invite me here tonight, on my birthday, just to do this?" My chest heaved violently, not just from anger, but from profound pain. Andrew faced me, a sneer on his lips, full of mockery and defiance. He looked at me with an utter lack of respect, as if I were an outdated, obsolete person clinging to the past. I should have done this a long time ago. The CEO of this company should have been me a long time ago, not that petty sales director position, Andrew sneered. "I'm taking what should have been mine all along. You've held power for too long, now it's time for you to retire." "Retire?" I repeated, my voice erupting like a suppressed growl. "Do you think a father like me would accept being treated by his son like a discarded old item, thrown into a corner? What are you doing, Andrew?" Andrew took another step, closer to me, his sharp cologne scent assaulting my nose, irritating me intensely. He lowered his voice, enough for me to hear clearly, but still carrying a hateful triumph. "I'm just doing what needs to be done. Do you think family ties have any value in this world? I'm doing what's necessary to move forward. You're no longer suitable. The market changes, and you should change your position too." "That's ridiculous." I tried to remain calm, but my chest heaved violently. "What are you doing all this for? A title doesn't make a man, Andrew." My words made Andrew pause slightly, the smile on his lips stiffening a bit. A flicker of worry crossed his eyes, but only for a moment. He quickly regained his confident demeanor, his gaze becoming colder and more ruthless than ever. Andrew looked around the room as if seeking confirmation of everyone's support. Antonio nodded subtly, as if empowering him, a slight smirk on his lips. Andrew moved even closer to me, almost touching me. His voice was now firm, cold, and echoed throughout the room, like a final verdict for me. "All right, then let me tell you where you belong. This chair is now my father-in-law's. As for you, you get out." I couldn't react in time. It wasn't that he physically pushed me down. There was no physical force. But those words, that tone, were a mental shock infinitely more painful. It was like an invisible force pushing me harder than any physical shove. I staggered back a step, feeling the whole room spinning. The entire room fell silent. Only the faint clinking of glasses as I stumbled back, hitting the small table next to my plastic chair. I felt as if I was being pushed out by an invisible force. Not by Andrew, but by the complicit silence of everyone. No one spoke up to defend me. No one had any reaction beyond the deadly silence. They just stood there, looking at me as if I were a pitiful wretch. Amidst that heavy silence, a heartbreaking cry echoed, bitter and out of place. "Grandpa!" It was little Ken's voice. The boy could no longer hold back, tears streaming down his small face. It was the only sound expressing a shred of genuine affection left on this terrible night. My grandson's cry tore at my heart, but it was also what kept me from completely collapsing. I slowly straightened up, feeling everything weigh heavily. My hands trembled, but I tried to keep them steady as I tucked my grandson's card into my jacket pocket. I looked at my son, directly into his cold, disdainful eyes. Andrew stood there, his face devoid of any warmth or remorse, only utter triumph. Teresa, Andrew's wife, stood next to him, her eyes averted but a faint smile playing on her lips, as if she were enjoying this spectacle. I turned my back on him, turned my back on the party, on the averted gazes, on the humiliation that surrounded me. I walked away, slowly but decisively, leaving the table, leaving the house that imprisoned me in pain and humiliation. I heard Ken's calls behind me, but I didn't dare to turn back. The door slammed shut behind me, a dry click echoing, completely severing me from the world inside. It left behind all the forced, awkward laughter, the betrayal, and the loneliness. I didn't know where I would go, but I knew I would never forget this night. Tonight, William Carter had been officially declared dead in his heart and family by his son, Andrew. But little did I know, tonight's humiliation was just the beginning of a counterattack that neither Andrew nor Antonio could have foreseen. I walked out of house number 24, Maple Creek Street, leaving behind the laughter and betrayal. The night swallowed me, bringing with it the biting cold of late autumn in Boston. I walked on the brick path, each step heavy, as if dragging a boulder in my heart. Ken's calls still echoed in my ears, but I didn't dare to turn back. I drove back to my small house near the company, where I had lived alone for many years. The familiar road, the quiet houses under dim yellow lights, but tonight they seemed to wear a different, somber look. A feeling of emptiness and dejection enveloped me, colder than any wind. I parked the car, walked into the house, the room as dark as my own mood. On my desk, I spread out the crumpled bills I had unconsciously picked up from the small table next to my flimsy plastic chair in Andrew's kitchen. The scent of butter and vanilla from the birthday cake had faded, replaced by the smell of old paper and ink. My heart pounded not from fear but from an ominous premonition. One by one, I carefully read them. All the expenses for tonight's party. Expensive imported wine, gourmet food, elaborate floral decorations, all paid with the company credit card in William Carter's name, but Andrew had the right to use a supplementary card for company representation expenses. He had used my own money, the money of the corporation I had built, to humiliate me, to entertain those who had sided with him. I flipped through other bills. Electricity, gas, maintenance costs, property taxes for the mansion Andrew lived in, all withdrawn from the company's account under the guise of asset management costs, and worse, approved by Andrew himself. It turned out that not just the party, but his luxurious lifestyle, the house he was so proud of, were all funds siphoned from the company under legal pretense. He was not just ungrateful, he was a deceitful, corrupt individual. Humiliation flared within me, hot, burning. I gripped the bills in my hands. They crumpled under my tight grasp. Even for the party where he humiliated his own father, he used his father's money to pay. I gnashed my teeth, my voice hoarse. He even siphoned off company funds to support himself and his family. This isn't just filial impiety, this is a crime. Andrew didn't just want power, he wanted to destroy me completely, both my honor and my assets. The pain, disappointment, and the question, why, kept swirling in my mind, but now they were mixed with a cold fury. I slowly pulled Ken's birthday card from my jacket pocket. "Happy birthday, Grandpa," the scrawled words a cruel reminder of innocence trampled. I had gone there hoping to celebrate, to feel a bit of family warmth on my birthday. Who knew? Andrew's invitation wasn't for celebration, but to make me a laughingstock, someone to be overthrown. I had neglected my family to build an empire, and now that very empire was being used by my son to turn against me. My gaze unconsciously swept across the table, stopping at an old photo of my wife Sarah. She was smiling, her eyes sparkling, her hand holding a bouquet of white roses. Sarah once said, William, you can build an empire, but family is our greatest legacy. Those words, now, echoed in my head like an alarm bell. I had been so engrossed in building an empire that I had forgotten my legacy. And now, that legacy was being trampled, destroyed from within. I picked up the phone, my fingers trembling not from fear, but from a cold, unshakable resolve. There were only 2 numbers I wanted to call right now, and I knew I had to call them, without delay. David, my loyal assistant, and lawyer Hugh. I picked up the receiver, my voice deep but unusually decisive, without a trace of sadness or weakness. David, tomorrow, I need a complete list of shareholders, recent stock transactions, and all financial reports of the company for the past 6 months. Come here immediately. On the other end of the line, David didn't ask another word. He understood the seriousness of the matter. I understand, boss. I'll prepare and bring them as soon as possible. I folded the phone, looking at the bundle of company keys still on the table. In the reflection on the polished wooden table, my face was no longer just a sad, lonely, abandoned old man, but a CEO, a father, with sharp eyes, ready to counterattack to protect what remained of him. I would not let them trample everything. Just then, a message popped up on my computer screen, an administrative notification. The board of directors meeting will be held tomorrow. Attendance is mandatory. And I knew the real battle would begin right at the upcoming board meeting, and would everything go as smoothly as he wished. Early that morning, I adjusted my tie in the mirror. The face of a 6-8-year-old man reflected in the glass. His eyes showed the fatigue of a sleepless night, but also a faint glimmer of hope, an unshakable determination. I told myself, my voice deep and firm, today will be the day I reclaim justice. I had lost family affection, but I could not lose everything I had built. The company building gleamed brightly in the morning sun, but in the grand lobby, the atmosphere was thick with tension and anticipation. Shareholders filled the seats, buzzing with conversation. Andrew and Antonio entered, their faces triumphant, shaking hands warmly everywhere, as if they were already the victors. Andrew offered a smug smile, glanced at me for a moment, then said loudly, "Enough for everyone around to hear. It's just a formality. I've prepared everything for this transition." I sat down in my familiar chair at the meeting table, trying to maintain a calm demeanor. David, my loyal assistant, placed a thick stack of documents in front of me, profit reports, market analysis, and specifically, a list of shareholders expected to vote in my favor. "Everything is under control, sir," David whispered, his voice full of confidence. "We have enough votes to keep the chair. The plan is clear." I nodded subtly, my confidence bolstered. David had always been reliable. The meeting began. The chairman announced, his voice echoing through the room. "Today we will vote on the CEO position and the company's restructuring plan to take our corporation further." Andrew stepped onto the podium, his speech confident, his voice booming through the room. He painted a promising future, bold strategies, revolutionary changes. "The new generation needs to lead the company," Andrew argued. "My father-in-law Antonio and I have clear plans for the future. The company cannot slow down just because of conservatism, just because of old ways of thinking that are no longer suitable for the modern market." Many shareholders nodded in agreement, the atmosphere in the room clearly leaning towards Andrew. I felt the shift. Then, it was my turn. I stood up, my gaze sweeping across each face, each person I had trusted, with whom I had built this empire. My voice was deep but weighty. Slowly presenting, I founded this company from nothing. Today's achievements did not come from lavish parties or empty promises. They came from sweat, from sleepless nights, from integrity and honor. I am still capable, and I believe in a sustainable future, a future that does not need to be traded for betrayal or for trampling on core values. The voting took place. The atmosphere became extremely tense. I looked at David, he whispered, trying to reassure me. "Don't worry, sir. We have the majority. Absolutely." But when the chairman announced the results, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Each number appeared on the screen, and my heart tightened. Andrew won the majority of votes. I lost. A complete defeat. The room erupted in applause. Andrew smiled triumphantly, full of victory, shaking hands with each shareholder. Antonio stood next to him, his face satisfied, also shaking hands with a few people, his eyes glancing at me with disdain. I sat frozen. My hands trembled on the cold wooden table. I clearly heard the scraping of chairs, the booming laughter of those who had just betrayed me, all like knives cutting deep into my heart, into every fiber of my being. My entire plan, my faith, had collapsed. As I quietly stood up to leave the meeting room, walking amid sympathetic and scornful glances, Andrew uttered a sarcastic remark, loud enough for me to hear. "You should learn to rest, William Carter. This is no longer your place. Your legacy is mine now." I walked out of the room, heavy with humiliation. On the way back to my small house, an indescribable uneasiness settled in my heart. I looked again at the documents David had given me this morning, the shareholder list, the financial reports. Suddenly, a few details, a few numbers, didn't match what I remembered. Something is wrong. A seed of doubt had just sprouted, colder than the late autumn wind. The applause still echoed in my head even as I walked out of the meeting room. A burst of vibrant, fervent applause, but not for me. It was for Andrew, the son I once believed would succeed me, now standing there, hand in hand with Antonio, his head held high, as if he had already become the new boss. The polite security guard opened the door, but their eyes avoided mine. I walked down the long corridor, hearing the hushed whispers of the employees. He lost his position. So fast. Just yesterday, he was still the CEO. A few older people looked at me with regret, but many young faces smirked, as if witnessing a fallen monument. I said nothing, just kept walking, my hand clutching an empty briefcase. When I reached the main gate, I pulled out my employee card to swipe. The scanner glowed red, accompanied by a brief beep. "Access denied." I tried again, still the same. My card had been deactivated just minutes after the meeting ended. The young receptionist pursed her lips, her voice small as if frightened. "I'm sorry, sir, this is an order from the new management." I looked at the card in my hand, that small plastic card that had been with me for over 30 years. Now it was just a useless piece of plastic. I returned to my office, but the door code had been changed. The nameplate William Grant, Chief Executive Officer, was also gone. Only bare nail holes remained on the polished wooden door. An employee was dismantling the bookshelves in the room. He kept his head down, not daring to look up at me. I stepped back, feeling my legs heavy. A lifetime of building, now swept away in just a few hours. That afternoon, I returned to my small house near the company, a place I still thought would at least offer quiet. But as soon as I opened the mailbox, I saw an envelope from the bank. Tearing it open, my heart pounded. A portion of my retirement account had been frozen. Reason: being used as collateral for an unpaid loan. A loan in Andrew's name. I tremblingly placed the envelope on the table. So, not just the company, but even the money meant for my old age had been swept into his games. I walked into the living room. The old pendulum clock ticked slowly, the sound echoing the loneliness of the house. I sat down in the armchair, my trembling hand pulling Ken's card from my pocket. The scrawled words "Happy Birthday, Grandpa" now became the only candle lighting my heart. I leaned back, looking at the ceiling, my eyes stinging. In my mind, Andrew's words at the birthday party echoed, "This spot belongs to my father-in-law. Get out." Then this morning, right at the meeting, he said again, "You should learn to rest." I clenched my fists. All these years I had taught him to be a decent man, only to be met with these words. I struggled to my feet, took out the documents David had given me that morning to review. At that time, I believed I had enough votes to keep my position, but the voting results proved otherwise. I flipped through each page. The data tables were neat, tidy, but the more I looked, the more glaring they became. A profit figure from the previous quarter was rounded excessively, completely different from the version I still had on my computer. An investment deal that I knew for sure had been canceled appeared as a successful return. I opened my personal computer, accessed the original data. Line by line it appeared, cold and precise. I compared it with the documents David had given me. The most important parts had all been altered. Not a mistake. This was a deliberate hand. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes tightly. In my mind, David's image from this morning appeared. His averted gaze, his firm voice. "We have the majority, you can rest assured, sir." A wave of disappointment surged, mixed with anger. David, the man I once considered my right-hand man, once called my second son, would he betray me to follow Antonio? I closed the file, sitting silently in the dark house, listening to the clock tick. No, I wouldn't collapse here. If David truly betrayed me, then that betrayal would become a decoy. I would let them think I was weak, that I was past my prime, and then they would fall into their own trap. I poured a glass of cold water, reflecting my image in the old mirror on the wall. My face was etched with wrinkles, but my eyes glowed like fire. You think you've won, I whispered to myself, but this chessboard still has one last piece, and it belongs to me. The pendulum clock in the darkened house steadily ticked, each tick like a painful beat in my chest. I sat motionless in the old armchair. In front of me, the forged documents, the subtly altered figures that David had brought me earlier. Each number, each line of text was now not just proof of betrayal, but like a knife cutting deep into my trust. I had spent my entire life building everything, trusting those around me. And now, even the person I once considered a son could turn his back so cruelly. Anger flared, burning hot like fire. But I knew this was not the time to act on emotion. A seasoned hunter never lets his prey know it's being watched. If David truly betrayed me, I would let that betrayal become a noose, tying up those who were gloating. I had to be calm. I had to be absolutely clear-headed. The next morning, I entered the company through the service entrance, reserved for employees and delivery personnel. My employee ID card had been deactivated the night before, but fortunately there were still a few long-time employees, those who had worked under me for decades, who silently respected me and let me pass without a word, simply bowing their heads. Their eyes held both apprehension and a hint of regret. My office was locked, but I knew the small meeting room on the lowest floor, rarely visited, still had a spare key hanging in the corner. That was where I often went when I needed a quiet space to think. I sat there, in the familiar chair, sipping cold tea, waiting for David. He arrived on time, looking as immaculate as ever, carrying a new stack of documents as I had requested. He was slightly surprised to see me there, but quickly regained his usual professional demeanor. I offered a faint smile, trying to conceal all my thoughts, as if I still trusted him absolutely. "David," I began, my voice calm, "I have an extremely important project and I need you to keep it absolutely confidential. It will be the key to my comeback." I handed him a thick folder. Inside was a detailed description of a new investment, a tech startup, portrayed as an opportunity promising colossal profits in the near future. However, all that information was merely a trap, a meticulously crafted piece of fake intelligence by me. The project was presented with full market analysis data, virtual growth charts, but hidden deep within were enormous potential risks, fatal flaws that any hasty, careless investor would easily fall prey to. "This is the key to my comeback plan, David. It must not get out. I trust you completely." David nodded, his eyes showing a hint of tension, perhaps from the pressure of a top-secret mission. I observed carefully, clearly seeing the moment he clenched the folder in his hand, his throat swallowing conspicuously. A flicker of uneasiness crossed his face, enough for me to know the fish had bitten the bait. That night, I sat in the small living room of my temporary rental house, the yellow lamplight flickering like a dying candle. The pendulum clock still ticked steadily. I sipped some tea, trying to keep my mind calm, waiting. The trap had been set. It was only a matter of time before it took effect. The phone on the table vibrated gently. An anonymous message arrived in the secure app I usually used for sensitive communications. This was not a random channel. In fact, I had secretly set it up beforehand and cleverly suggested it to David as a safe way to communicate with Antonio's hidden partners for exchanging sensitive information. David, in his gullibility and eagerness to please Antonio, had completely followed suit, unaware that the recipient of the message was none other than me. I opened the message. My heart seemed to stop for a beat, not from surprise, but from the cold confirmation of a successful plan. The screen displayed a complete copy of the fake document I had given David this morning. Not only that, the message also included a few minor but extremely important additional details. These were questions or observations that only Antonio could have made after reviewing the material. This proved that Antonio had received the file, had analyzed it, and David had quickly forwarded Antonio's queries through this secure channel, completely unaware that the recipient was me. So David had betrayed me. He had forwarded the documents directly to Antonio within just a few hours, and now he was also providing me with vivid evidence of his interaction with Antonio. The initial shock of the cruel truth, of the blindness of someone once close, quickly passed. Instead, a strange sense of calm spread throughout my body. The game had begun, and I had placed my first piece on the board. I poured another glass of water, staring at my reflection in the wall mirror. The eyes in the mirror were no longer dull as the night before, but bright like two flames, harboring an iron will that nothing could shake. "You think you have the chess pieces in your hands," I whispered, my voice soft but full of power. "But in reality, you are playing my game." That morning, I left the small rented house with an old leather briefcase full of papers. My heart was heavy, but each step was unusually decisive. I was no longer a desperate old man, but a warrior who had tasted defeat and was now preparing for the final counterattack. I went to the office of the city's oldest newspaper, where my old friend, veteran investigative reporter Sarah Miller, was waiting. She was a sharp woman, unafraid of confrontation, and I trusted her more than anyone at this moment. In the small room filled with the distinctive smell of roasted coffee and ink of a newsroom, I placed the briefcase on the table, unlocked it, and carefully revealed each piece of evidence. Sarah sat opposite me, her eyes probing, then gradually growing sharper as I began to tell my story. First were the detailed bank statements, the lavish birthday party bills Andrew used to humiliate me, the expenses for his luxurious mansion, all drawn from my credit card, or worse, from the company account under the guise of management expenses. Next were the original financial data, compared with the altered versions David had submitted, clearly exposing hidden losses, numbers beautified to deceive shareholders. And finally, the fake startup project file I had given David, along with evidence from the secure channel last night, proving David had leaked all that information to Antonio. Sarah flipped through each page, her eyes lighting up like fire. She was a born reporter, always hungry for the truth. "William," she said, her voice lowering, "you know this is an atomic bomb, right? It will blow everything up." "I know, Sarah. I know very well. But the truth needs to be revealed, no matter the cost." Sarah didn't hesitate for a second. I saw determination in her eyes. Within hours, the article was published on the homepage of the prestigious online newspaper. Dirty takeover plot, new CEO and father-in-law in financial scandal, hidden corners at Peterson Corporation. The sensational headline, the content exposing the truth in every detail. Just 2 hours later, that media bomb truly exploded. Social media erupted with thousands of shares and indignant comments. Major television channels simultaneously broadcast breaking news, deeply analyzing the scandal. Financial analysts began fierce criticism. Hundreds of phone calls from shareholders, large and small, started pouring into the company, questioning, demanding explanations, even threatening to reclaim shares. Peterson Corporation's stock price, already shaky, plummeted dramatically that morning, losing billions of dollars in an instant. In the CEO's office, Antonio and Andrew froze before the large TV screen repeatedly showing the article, along with William's image and the glaring red headlines. Major shareholders called incessantly, the office phones ringing non-stop. No one was silent anymore. Antonio, pale-faced, tried his best to reassure people over the phone, but his words carried no weight. Andrew stood rooted to the spot, cold sweat pouring, understanding that everything had collapsed. David, seeing the situation was dire, understood he had been exposed and was just a scapegoat. He discreetly left the company without a word. He knew well, if he stayed, he would certainly be made to take the blame for Andrew and Antonio. In the emergency meeting room, where only Antonio and Andrew remained, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Antonio, his cruel nature now fully revealed, coldly turned to Andrew, his voice full of contempt. "This is all your fault. You dragged me into this dirty game. Your stupidity and greed have destroyed everything. From now on, I'm not involved." Andrew panicked, his face drained of all color. "Father-in-law, you can't abandon me now. Please, Father. You are no longer my son-in-law. You are just a failure, a burden. Never call me father-in-law again." Antonio decisively turned his back. Andrew collapsed into a chair, like a puppet whose strings had been cut, cold sweat still profusely pouring. Antonio left, leaving him alone in the empty room, where only the incessant ringing of phones and the news from the TV screen reporting live on the collapse of an empire remained. Live television showed dozens of shareholders gathered outside the company lobby, holding signs, shouting, "Give back the company! Give back the company!" And the name William once again was repeated, this time in respect and public support. After the fierce media storm, Peterson Corporation fell into unprecedented chaos. Major shareholders demanded their shares back, lucrative contracts were suspended, and the stock price continued to plummet, taking millions of dollars with it. The name Andrew Grant became a symbol of greed, incompetence, and filial impiety across all newspapers, a costly lesson for the business world. As for Antonio, he quickly disappeared from public view, only managing to issue a vague statement that he too was a deceived investor, then washed his hands of all responsibility. Although I knew he couldn't completely escape blame, I no longer wished to pursue it. Meanwhile, amidst the chaotic information, public opinion began to recall my name. No longer as a frail old man pushed aside, but as a resilient founder betrayed, who retained his dignity and ultimately turned the tables. Although I had lost my position as CEO and all executive power over the company, I no longer felt I needed them. A title could not salvage a company whose reputation had been tarnished to the core. But the truth had been exposed, and that was enough for me to hold my head high and reclaim my honor. A few days later, late one afternoon, as I was reading the newspaper in my small rented house, I saw Andrew standing at the door. His face was haggard, his suit rumpled, his eyes red and swollen. He had lost everything. His wife had left him, his money was gone, his reputation shattered. He walked forward, collapsing to his knees right at the doorstep, his voice choked with sobs. "Dad, I was wrong. I've lost everything. Please, Dad, please forgive me." I looked at him for a long time. My son, once my pride, all my hopes for inheriting this empire, was now just a broken, lost man. I felt a fleeting pang in my chest. The father-son bond was still there, deep down, but the scar from that birthday, from the insults and betrayal, was still too deep. I couldn't embrace him as if nothing had happened, couldn't pretend that nothing had ever broken. I simply spoke softly, my voice deep and full of weariness. "I have nothing left to give you, Andrew, except the truth. Live with it. Learn to stand up on your own 2 feet. Andrew burst into uncontrollable sobs, tears streaming down his cheeks. But I didn't open the door. I just stood there, watching him leave, his staggering figure gradually fading into the late afternoon light. A few weeks later, I officially handed over the company to a younger face, a truly capable person, once a promising young vice president, unconnected to any factions or power struggles. I chose to step aside, no longer entangled in the game of power and malicious schemes. I wanted to dedicate the rest of my life to living a different kind of life. I sold most of my shares, keeping only a small symbolic portion, then used the money to buy a small house in the suburbs. The house was simple, not as luxurious as the old mansion, but it had a rose garden in front, warm sunlight streaming through the windows every morning, a peaceful quiet that I had never enjoyed at the peak of power. I planted a few more vegetables and watched birds sing every afternoon. A dedicated nurse visited me weekly, checking my health, talking with me, helping me gradually recover both physically and mentally. The greatest light healing my soul was Ken. The boy occasionally came to visit his grandpa with his mother. He brought new drawings. Grandpa standing under a small house, next to a flower garden, a bright red sun behind him looking so peaceful. The childlike laughter filled the small room, chasing away the emptiness I had once felt. I hung those drawings on the wall, right next to the scrawled "Happy Birthday, Grandpa" card he had drawn long ago. Every time I looked at them, my heart felt lighter. The scars seemed to fade a little. One late autumn afternoon, I sat by the window, lighting a small candle, its gentle scent diffusing through the room. The wind blew through the curtain gap, making the candle flicker softly but not extinguish. I smiled, whispering, "A true birthday isn't about any seat of power, but about still having someone call you Dad or Grandpa. And most importantly, when you can still maintain peace and self-respect in your soul." In the garden, Ken was running around chasing a butterfly, his clear laughter echoing in the tranquil space. I knew I had lost many things, lost a part of my life and trust. But the most important things, my honor reclaimed, the truth revealed, and genuine affection from a child, remained intact, shining like an unextinguished candle. And that was enough for a new beginning, for a life that had weathered too many storms. And so, my story, William Carter, ends here. My life, once swirling in fame and power, ultimately found true meaning in serenity, in simple moments with my grandson, and in the acceptance that some things are more precious than any empire. I lost a son, experienced the pain of betrayal, but I did not let it destroy me. I fought, not to cling to the CEO position at all costs, but to protect the legacy of a lifetime, to keep the flame of integrity burning. Ultimately, I chose to let go of power to find peace for myself, to live my remaining days fully. Looking back, I realized that we often chase after fleeting things, external glamour, and forget the core values of family affection and kindness. Andrew ignored all of that because of greed, because of his desire for power, and the price he paid was too high. I never wished for my son to suffer what he caused, but sometimes the most painful stumbles are the greatest lessons. I hope that my story, with its ups and downs and profound lessons, can touch a part of your hearts. This life, however complex, the truth remains. Love, sincerity, and self-respect are the most precious assets we can preserve. Don't let material desires blind you. Don't let family relationships be fractured by frivolous calculations. Friends, I know everyone's life has its own challenges. But always remember, the most important thing is not how much you have, but what you keep and how you treat those around you. Are you cherishing what you have? Are you willing to fight for true values or get caught in the whirlpool of fame and fortune? Take some time to reflect on these things and don't hesitate to share your thoughts. I am always interested in your stories, and I hope that together we can find deeper meanings in this life. Thank you for listening to my story.